Well, thank you for staying with Citizen Weekend. My guests are with me in studio. Franklin Mkwanja, Executive Director, CMD, is joining us online. With me in studio is Professor Maxwell Miyawa, constitutional lawyer, and Gordon Kachola, foreign policy analyst. We'll be placing a call to Dr. Mukisa Kitui, former Secretary General, UNCTAD, and Dr. Kuro Court, Third Way Alliance Party leader, in just a bit. But let me start with you, Prof. You were here earlier on analyzing this before the outcome came. Were you surprised by this outcome?
It's in some way or somewhat exceedingly surprising, given the vigor and rigor that the Kenyan diplomatic paraphernalia put into this. I'm sure both President William Ruto and Raila Odinga are equally surprised. This is probably one of the outcomes that were not expected. Reason being that, given the kind of vibrancy in the lobbying, the door-to-door campaign, the one-on-one campaign and meetings with the presidents of Africa, highly unexpected. But it could possibly have been that maybe Raila Odinga expected it because, being a secret ballot process, nobody knows what goes into the mind of another person. But I think also it could also have been expected, given the great divide, the linguistic divide, the regional interests that were also involved in this, particularly the SADC letter, Barua ya SADC, the one that came on the 11th hour.
So you think it had an impact? Foreign affairs.
Yes, given the voting patterns, particularly once the Madagascar candidate withdrew, you could see the upswing of votes for the Djibouti candidate on the one hand. So it tells you that the SADC vote bloc took a particular pattern, and that pattern was in the disfavor of the East African candidate, Raila Amolo Odinga. Okay.
Kachola, were you surprised by this outcome?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely not. Look, the AU elections have always had fair share of its surprises.
Yeah.
We can trace back from even during Amina's time, even Lamine Zuma's time. We normally have stronger candidates in the platform of AU do not make it, going by history. And I think this is not about just the candidate itself, but it's about the country. This particularly for Raila Odinga. It's not about Raila Odinga, it's about the country. Why am I saying it's about the country? Because at this hour and time, there are so many things going around, and around Kenya particularly, in the region. We went to this election when Kenya was trying to reach out to the region and trying to make peace. And I think that is where our problems began. We thought we were doing well, whereas we were viewed differently. This election had absolutely nothing to do with the Lusophone, Anglophone, Francophone, if you ask me. That is already a tired narrative in the African continent. Today, what is there is to do much with a country like Kenya, how we are perceived outside there, rather than what we are. Kenya is aggressive, Kenya is abrasive, but is that what we are, how are we perceived by other countries?
So we are not our neighbor's favorite, is that what you're saying?
We are not the favorite of some of those people we think are our friends. And I think that is the point where we need to begin looking at our relationship with the rest of the continent, and maybe have more footprints where we still don't.
Okay, let me bring in Mkwanja on this. Mkwanja, what is your reaction to the loss of Raila Amolo Odinga? Did we overplay our perceived support as a country?
Thank you, Trevor, for having me. I equally wasn't surprised by Raila Odinga's loss. I certainly am of the view that he had a very slim chance to emerge victorious. And this is informed by the geopolitical dynamics, as well as historical precedents. But if you just look at the geopolitical dynamics alone, there is a question as to whether the actions, the diplomatic actions of Kenya in the most recent past would have aided the failure of Raila Odinga. I will take you back to October, November 2023 at the height of the Israeli-Palestine-Hamas conflict. And it seemed that the two nations, the two-state position by Kenya is inconsistent with what others think and act. If you look at it, that you cannot talk about terrorism and not talk about occupation. By the mere fact that President William Ruto initially came out condemning terrorism, strongly leaving out the occupation vibe, only to come back and try to capture that in the meeting in Riyadh with some African heads of state and the Saudi government, tells you that there is an inconsistent policy around that. Could that have played out the challenges of Raila Odinga, inspiring confidence in the northern region especially? Then look at the most recent blunder, a phone call to President Macron to discuss the Great Lakes region conflict. And this was largely criticized as a question to Ruto. Is he a Pan-African in terms of just rhetoric? Is the Pan-Africanist rhetoric a genuine commitment, or it's mere political posturing? And then you look at the very tactical statement that came in at a very interesting timing and dismissed by the Foreign Affairs PS. And those are the numbers that have really made Raila to lose. Even if you look at other questions around the age and the perception of vitality, Africa being very predominantly youthful and Raila Odinga being 80, compared to the dynamism that this role requires, the energy that this role requires, would that have played in the mind of many of the African heads of state, even if they are themselves, majority of them are elderly? Finally, the question of the viability of experience. Kenya presented a politically charged candidate, highly experienced Raila Odinga as a politician. But Djibouti, on the other hand, presented a diplomat with no less than 30 years of experience serving 3 governments. And if you look at the Mjadala that was done sometime late last year, you could see that the Foreign Affairs Minister, now AUC chairman, exuded a very good understanding of the institutions of the African Union, as well as the global linkages and how to be able to bring a reform agenda. So I think experience, age, and vitality, and the geopolitical dynamics, and our seemingly naive, inconsistent foreign policy in the instance of the Great Lakes conflict and the Israeli-Hamas Palestine conflict played into the hands of what you may want to call as, the regional alliances and the challenges of underlying diplomatic positions that need to be taken and turned on.
Okay. Prof, where did we falter? Is it on the geopolitical issues that we took a stand to earlier, a stand that the peers perceived as inconsistent, like what Mkwanja is saying?
I brutally disagree. The loss by the Kenyan candidate has got nothing to do with the experience of the Djibouti candidate. It has got nothing to do with the knowledge of the Djibouti candidate. Neither does it have anything to do with the geopolitics of particular regions in Africa. In my view, I think the loss, of course, the unexpected loss, unforeseen loss, could have been brought perhaps in one way or another, what we would call a peer rivalry. You know, as my colleague has said, Tanzania or Uganda may put a posture of strongly being with you, but deep down their heart, they have some sort of peer rivalry. They may not like you in one way or another. Because if you had seen the consistency of the 21, 22, 23 votes throughout, it tells you something, that there was a brother here and there who stood with you. The reason why this thing has got to do with no knowledge, in fact, if anything, Raila Odinga is most highly experienced in terms of global politics, in terms of international relations. he has not served in the Foreign Affairs Ministry, but he has served in bigger capacities. Raila Odinga has been the High Representative of Infrastructure for African Union. That puts it at a greatly higher pedestal than any other person. This is a young person, perhaps with no less than 20 years of experience. So the loss had got nothing to do with. Perhaps the loss could also have been the way in which the language of our campaigns was packaged within the African continent. You know, at times when you overdo something, you know, it can become so much abrasive. You know, it could rub people in one way, or in the wrong way or another. But I think more importantly, the way I see it is that there is a brother in here and there who probably was not telling us the truth, you know, was speaking to us tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
Remember, in Africa today, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, the greatest or one of the biggest countries, there could probably be 3 or 4 giants. You go to South Africa, you go to Nigeria, then you come to Kenya, where they talk about in terms of the size of the Kenyan economy, the level of our own advancement, the level of even African education, you know, so that peer rivalry, it has got nothing to do with personalities or even our politics. It has got to do with why should we continue to be dominated by giants, you know, so that it could actually have been a contest of minorities. Remember, Africa, particularly most countries in Western Africa, which are Francophone, they're also smaller countries, smaller economies. So it could also be a politics of solidarity. In fact, in my view, I think Raila's loss is largely blamable on the solidaristic nature of politics. The politics which does not want, or most African leaders or most African countries or a people not wanting to be associated with the dominant. I can tell you for certain, if America was to front a candidate for the United Nations, assuming there was voting, he or she will lose that election. Okay? And even if you look at it from the global perspective, you look at the people who have been the UN chiefs for quite a long time, it has always come from the fringes. So I think the idea of minority could have infiltrated the African thinking, heads of state thinking, heads of state psyche, so that we leave the race to the minorities and not the dominant. Okay, so that is, in my view...
So it was more of bringing the underdogs into this.
Yes, into the leadership of the African continent. And not any other, merits aside, age aside, experience aside. In fact, if anything, Raila Odinga is one of the most experienced of all the candidates.
Yeah. The pictures you're seeing right now, just a few minutes ago in Addis Ababa, where there was supposed to be a celebratory dinner, but it seems that even the delegation that went to the Addis Ababa African Union Election Commission are still in a celebratory mood despite the loss. Listen in.
Hello, how are you?
Fine,
How are you, my friend?
We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Still innocent. How are you, my friend? Very good, very good. Ndugu, hujambo? Very good. Kisumu town? Yes. Habari yako? Uko salama? Oron? Uko salama?
I'm good.
Hello, Mili. How are you? Very good. Hello, how are you? Very good. Habari. Hey, Baraza. Very good. Very good. Hello, my dear. How are you both?
Well, that dinner right now is a closed-door dinner happening right now as we speak, and so the media is not allowed in there. We'll find out what came out of it. But Gordon, you had mentioned earlier on that this is not about the candidate, it's about the country. What is it about Kenya that disadvantaged right
One, if you ask, what is it about Kenya? One would quickly ask, is it a big man syndrome that haunted Kenya in this election? Because if you look at Africa, and this is one challenge that has faced Egypt, has faced Nigeria, has faced South Africa, the big man syndrome, whenever you front a candidate, it's not about that candidate. You are looked at, you are viewed differently. Because Kenya is already playing almost at the level of a prefect within the region. There is nothing happening within the region that Kenya do not want to take part in. If it happens within the region, you will find Kenya's footprints there. Kenya will leave footprints, that is given. So probably there are individuals within the region that looks at Kenya and imagine, given more powers, given more privileges in the region and in the continent, what would they not do? I don't agree when we talk about age, because it is in Africa that we have over 92-year-old presidents. All the presidents in Africa, averagely, they are 70 and above. So age here wasn't a factor. Recently, Kenya had a foreign policy document, which was launched. Does this foreign policy document really speak to our engagement with other states within the continent and out? To me, it doesn't directly speak to that. Rather, it's an elaborate document that was enhanced from the original document of 2014. So maybe the policy drafters needs to take a backseat and really relook at Kenya's foreign policy. Are we going to look inwards or outwards? We can't continue to look inwards because we deal in a realistic world. Realism aspect of it doesn't require us to deal from looking inside. But we can reflect from the inside while looking outside. How are we going to engage so that we review our friendship in the region? Where we have not done so well, how can we make it better? This election in itself, I think what really complicated it is the issue of DRC and our position on matters DRC. And the moment you saw Rwanda and South Africa begin to trade jabs over who is not doing what, who is, that clearly, and you know Kenya's position about DRC, you know our friends when it comes to this matter. It clearly, to me, it pointed at possibly one of the reasons that Kenya suffered. But as if that's not enough, Kenya having suffered that, you look, there is one vote that was abstained throughout.
Yeah.
Then what does it say? Then you look at a point when we thought Kenya would do better, there is a spoiled vote, then there are 3 votes that again were abstained. These were indications that probably certain region had already gotten signals that it's not going to be Kenya now. Where we have reached, we have to rethink or relook at our engagement with the nation Kenya. Yeah. And those are some of the issues. And I think, to me, this serves as a moment to reflect. And the foreign policy drafters and foreign policy makers must now relook into Kenya's foreign policy engagement with the rest of the world moving forward. We must first pacify the region, pacify Africa. Yeah. But even having said that, there is the aspect of having a nation in 2 or 3 different regional blocks. Does it serve Kenya best? Does it serve us well? Does it serve that economic bloc well? We are welcoming people within East African community. Yeah. It's a good thing. Economically, if you look at it from the angle of economic diplomacy, it serves the region too well because of the numbers. Okay. And because, business goes with numbers. All right. But who do we welcome? We normally welcome people to East African community that have internal issues. And once they come in, we go into their internal issues. Does going into their internal issues serve us right? Yes, I think it serves right because we are enhancing our diplomatic engagement. But when it comes to the vote, does it serve us right?
It's a question out there that we need to talk about. And Mukwanja, I'll come back to you in just a bit, but I'll take a quick break here on Citizen Weekend. When you come back, I'll also bring in Dr. Mukisa Kitui on phone. He's the former Secretary General UNCTAD, and Dr. Kuro Court, Third Way Alliance Party leader. We'd also like to hear from you at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Citizen Weekend. We're back in just a bit. Don't go too far. All right, thank you for staying in Citizen Weekend. We still continue the post-analysis of the AU elections after Raila's big loss there. Franklin Mkwanja, Executive Director, CMD, and Professor Maxwell Meyawa, Constitutional Lawyer, is with me here. And Gordon Kachola, Foreign Policy Analyst. We'll be speaking to Dr. Mukisa Kitui, former Secretary General UNCTAD, in just a bit on phone, and Dr. Kuro Court, Third Way Alliance Party leader, as well on phone in just a bit. But let me bring in Mkwanja back on this conversation. Mkwanja, you had mentioned age being a disadvantage. Some people view it as an advantage because then it shows that there's experience, and that was the perfect person to lead the African Union Commission.
Yes, I brought up this issue, Trevor, and it's not far-fetched. And I mentioned it as age and perception of vitality, not condemning the candidate's age. But we know that Kenya has been at the forefront since the Gen Z uprising, raising the question of the place and role of young people in leadership. And Raila Odinga has been a figure that has been condemned and praised in equal measure, including his candidature for AUC. And he's been a very actively debated candidate online, with some of the Kenyans supporting his candidature and others particularly pointing at his actions post the Gen Z uprising. And these perceptions play out in the minds of people. So it's a perception question. I also agree with panelists that there is the Muslim-Christian, small and big nations, the Anglophone and Francophone dynamics that played out. But largely, we have to interrogate ourselves as a country. Even if you look at how President William Ruto has attempted to build a reputation as a vocal advocate of, African solutions to African problems, have we lived to that expectation when we expected? I also agree that our Raila Odinga's major Waterloo, and if you look at the patterns of voting, is that he initially did not get any significant support from the SADC region. And the SADC seemed to go to the Djiboutian candidate as the process continued. And this is the question that brings in. Therefore, is this reputation that largely President Ruto has tried to build, even embracing the Pan-African dress code of a Kaunda suit, really mere, political posturing, or is it really, a commitment to Pan-Africanism? And these are issues that have to be raised continuously. I insist that, in my view, Raila retained a very small chance for victory because of some of these issues. You cannot rule out the perceptions of how young people played, the issue of youth and their involvement in governance and policy processes, and the actions of Raila Odinga, whether they have been adequately explained or not, and whether the issue of the age and perception of vitality is a question that, and I acknowledge that Africa has some of the oldest leaders. And then you cannot rule out, you cannot compare the experience of a 30-year-old diplomat and look at the geopolitical positioning, the geopolitical and economic interests of Djibouti, and how Djibouti is strategically placed, and how the powers that be consider Djibouti, and find a foreign affairs minister who's been there for regimes over 30 years, with 20 years as a foreign affairs minister in that country, compared to Raila's short stint as a high-level representative, and then consider. My view is that Raila Odinga is largely a politically experienced leader and not a diplomat. Did the presidents of Africa require someone with the larger political profile, or they want a diplomat who can be able to connect Africa Union to the influential role that it requires? Those are things that I think let Raila Odinga down in this candidature.
Okay, let me bring in Prof back into this. What does this now mean for local politics here, especially for Raila Amolo Odinga?
Though I'm not a political commentator, I think probably I can give you another dimension, which is still political or apolitical, whatever you want to call it. The question then would be then who actually has gained the most? Who is the greatest harvester in all this? I know there are divergent opinions out there, but I want to draw parallels, Trevor, because this is support for Raila Odinga by William Ruto. 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, we saw support for Raila Odinga by another president in the name of Uhuru Kenyatta. And I think we learned this during the Moi regime. You put your mouth where your money is, or you put your money where your mouth is. I can tell you for certain that, and this is the reason why I believe that the greatest beneficiary of all this is President William Ruto, Samoei Ruto, is this. William Ruto stuck out his neck, went with Raila door to door. In fact, the most surprising thing was he took Raila to Museveni's doorstep. He went out of his way. He campaigned for Raila, perhaps with his personal money or state machinery and state resources. He did it. And he was not afraid of falling with him. Now that he has fallen with him, compare that, draw that parallel to Uhuru Kenyatta, who at a time when he was supporting Raila Odinga with all the state resources, state machinery, the best he could do was to rant at State House, rant at his own people, rant at his own followers. Yeah. Uhuru Kenyatta could not even hold a rally in Ichaweri in support of Raila Odinga. And if history does not betray us, look at what Moi did to Uhuru Kenyatta in 2002, 2001. Uhuru Kenyatta, he plucked Uhuru Kenyatta from the fringes, made him a KANU candidate. KANU that time was a behemoth, you know, even though he fell with him. But Moi went with him to each and every crook and cranny of every village with him. This is somebody who stands with you. Moi's support can only be compared to President William Ruto's support for Raila Odinga. Yeah. Uhuru made support for Raila, which was only lip service, but not practical reality in terms of support. That's why I do believe that for local politics, you know, people could be saying that, you know, the other dynamics. But I think the person who has gained a great deal in all this is President William Ruto. You know, one thing he has shown the whole country, what we call magnanimity, political magnanimity. Nemesis, enemies, sworn enemies, you can always forgive and forget, embrace them, and chart a new path, a new future.
And hold that thought for a bit, Prof. I'll come back to you to clear that thought as well on how you think Ruto is the one that has gained out of this entire conversation. Let me bring in Dr. Mukisa Kitui, former Secretary General UNCTAD, is joining us on phone. And Dr. were you surprised by this outcome, and where did Raila falter?
I was not particularly surprised by this outcome. And it's important to know that I have commented about this for a couple of times in the recent past. It had nothing to do with Raila's campaign as an individual. It is more a consequence of a structural injustice in the voting patterns at the African Union. So to say Raila faltered is to assume that he could have done something about it. I think he went the extra mile, but the structural challenges in the electoral process always had this thing tilted against him.
Dr. Mukisa, the reason I ask you that question is because we have people inside that closed-door meeting, and right now Raila is quoted as saying that I was on the verge of winning before unforeseen circumstances tilted the tide against us, quoting him verbatim. You're saying it's a structure, so what are these unforeseen circumstances that he's talking about?
I have not talked to Raila to know what is hidden that might have changed some dynamics. But I will say certainly a number of things did not work in his favor. One, when the only non-Francophone candidate won this election, the candidate from South Africa who preceded the immediate outgoing chair, there was virtual unity across the Anglophone Africa. And there was the benefit that the Francophone candidate who had served one term was underperforming badly. That worked in her interest. Now, the fact that SADC at the last moment declared their solidarity with the candidate from Madagascar, something they did delay very, very long about, did not help very much when we knew that by and large the Francophone bloc, even after some promises were made verbally that they would support Raila, they just did what many of us expected them to do, which is stick with their own candidate. That's an important consideration. But there's also another thing that you should not downplay. In matters of appealing to Africa, Raila is larger than Ruto. So you don't think that Ruto was winning support for Raila. Ruto's uncalled for solidarity with Israel over the invasion of Gaza, Ruto's strange behavior in allowing abductions of prominent persons out of Kenya have not endeared him to a lot of Africans as a face of campaign. In those kind of areas, he was much more a liability than an asset to Raila's campaign.
I find that interesting, Dr. because also still inside there, Raila said that Ruto did not ask me to vie for the AUC. It was my own initiative. But what does that mean for the country going forward? Because this is the second time we are attempting to get to the AUC position and we still missed out. What should our introspect be like? Where do we need to fix our issues?
Okay. A number of things are very important in this regard. I think we should mention this for starters. It is positive that Kenya is almost belatedly seeing the importance of supporting its candidates for major international positions. Like many of you may know, I was not a candidate of Kenya when I became the first Kenyan Under Secretary General of the United Nations. Okay. Kenya should not come in to present candidates at the end of the day. What you need to do is what Francophone countries have been doing. Start identifying young talent in the professions that are relevant for international appointments. Start growing them. For example, Kenya can start recruiting brilliant young men and women and employing them to be junior professional officers, JPOs, in the United Nations system. That way, they get exposed, they get to know the contacts, to know the ropes. Then they can compete their way up in the UN system in international public service. What we've been doing is wait, and we've just done this for Ambassador Amina Mohammed and Raila Odinga. It is not good enough to have this haphazard encouragement of candidates as if it's a political thing that we want to identify with a person. Start looking at what do others do to build blocks of credibility and nurture candidates for international public elections and public appointments. So let this be not a one-off, but a pointer that we want to see how we can grow Kenyan candidature for international positions. And that has to be a systemic thing, not about individually I'll run around and I'll charter planes and I'll put some money into getting somebody there and I'll recruit a lot of political supporters to go to Addis Ababa to celebrate a potential victory. That's not how it's done.
And Dr. Mukisa, before I let you go, there was that general sentiment here by the panelists that we are not our neighbor's favorite. And you can see this by the voting pattern that happened, because the first round, Raila was at 20, second he was at 22, third he was at 23. And then when it was just the two of them, Mahmoud and Raila, he now came to 21. Is it that we are not our neighbor's favorite?
Well, one thing is important. Our neighbors don't owe us anything. It's how do we invest in genuine solidarity from not just our neighbors, but from our region. Secondly, why do you take our verbal solidarity to be a given when you know that this is going to be a secret ballot election? So a genuine embrace that we stand for what they aspire to is much more important than getting a few presidents to declare publicly they're supporting. But third also, we should say that nobody tied up the vote of SADC. SADC in this case should have been an important next door constituency for Kenya to cultivate. But you see, they were late in coming on board, late in deciding they were going to support the candidate of Madagascar. And when that candidate was stepping out, the SADC vote was not tied in as a vote of solidarity with a country which had supported the SADC candidate in the previous election. So these are just some nuances, but I think still the fundamental phenomenon you have to deal with is the numeric overrepresentation of Francophone Africa in the elective process across the African Union.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Mkisa Kitui, the former Secretary General UNCTAD, speaking to us on phone. Let me bring you back into this conversation, Gordon. And what next from here? How will this impact local politics in your view?
Even before we go to local politics, Trevor, this was a rematch. You remember we had first away match with Djibouti in New York while we were going for the UN Security Council seat. And Djibouti lost to Kenya. Now we are home. Away we dealt with them fair and square. We are home. They went and learned how fair or unfair we play. Then they came for us. But coming back home, as unpredictable as Raila has always been, we don't know what he will say. We don't know what direction he will take. But of late, I think if you want to know what Raila is thinking, you need to listen to a few individuals in this country. Then you will definitely know the thinking of Raila. You need to listen to Oburu Odinga. You need to listen to other people around him. But particularly if you listen to Oburu Odinga, you would know the thinking of Raila Odinga. A few days ago, Oburu made utterances that could easily tell you the thinking of Raila Odinga. I don't think Raila Odinga is going to walk out of this government anytime soon. He's here to stay. And knowing President Ruto too well, I think President Ruto is not done with Raila as far as what Raila can offer to Africa, what Raila can offer to the world. Let us not be surprised if we see Raila scaling a bit of his good works to the global stage. I will not be surprised at all, because this is not the only thing that Raila can go for. Raila can go for other things that are not even electoral, that are appointive in nature, even at the UN level. But Dr. Mkisa Kitui has said something which is very fundamental. As a country, it's time we think 50, 70, 100 years to come. How do we nurture leaders at who we want to represent us at the global stage, at the continental stage? We now know for sure that at certain points in this life, we will have another chance for Eastern Africa region to produce AUC candidates. Can we begin to front young, energetic individuals, educated, within AU structures, so that they learn, they grow through the system, so that by the time they want to go for these particular seats, it's not about Kenya. It's not about those individuals. It's about now the character, the demeanor, the experience. AU will look at them as one of them. You look at Kofi Annan, for example. By the time Kofi Annan was going for a UN Secretary General position, it was almost unopposed. Why? Because Kofi Annan began his job at UN at the lowest level. He grew within the system. The system knew him. He was not a stranger within that system. So it is time, Kenya, we think, in the next few years, why are we not fronting someone for even UNHCR position as commissioner? Within the UN system, within the IGAD system, and all these other global and continental bodies. Okay. I think that is something that is very fundamental for us to do.
All right. Let me bring in Mkwanja on this before we wind up on this conversation. Mkwanja, what does this mean for the regional politics going forward, especially here in Kenya? Kindly unmute. Unmute your microphone, Mkwanja. We can't hear you.
Hear you pretty well. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes. You're back.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I think locally we have to pose the question in the aftermath of Raila's loss for the AUC position. Who needs who in the Kenyan political context? I reckon if you look at Raila Odinga's party, ODM, there is simmering tension between those who are pretty seated comfortably in the bedroom of the government and those ones who feel that the blunders that the party committed towards the 2022 general elections must not be repeated. And Raila Odinga has to come back home now and look at how to, diffuse the tensions and retain his immense followership as a party leader, so that then he can be relevant to William Ruto. And William Ruto needs Raila Odinga because it seems while one day in politics is far too long, but it seems if elections were to be called today, William Ruto would struggle to climb the mountain. And therefore he has to continuously court people like Raila Odinga who can then be able to replace those numbers. So it's going to be a very interesting, political dynamic as the days, come by. Because also handling both Raila Odinga and William Ruto, it's like juggling a lever, and they are both very unpredictable. So we'll wait and see how Raila responds to his own internal party dynamics and how the national support for William Ruto in his traditional support areas, particularly that supported him in the last election, continue to play out. Could Raila Odinga be looking at himself as a strong candidate that can challenge William Ruto? I think only time matters. Let's see how the politics around the appointment of IEBC Commission, the politics of majority in the National Assembly, and the politics of reconstituting particularly the positions of the principal secretaries play out and see what's at stake, including whether now ODM is going to be led by Raila Odinga into a formal agreement and arrangement of working with UDA, because there's been quite a confusion about that, whether ODM is in government and whether they're working together formally or informally, and those are things that we will use to gauge. I think at a regional level, Kenya would still continue to play a significant role. President William Ruto is the chairman of EAC now, but the way he continues to build his reputation as a vocal advocate of Pan-African solutions to Pan-African problems must be followed by proper actions that speak confidence to regional and continental leaders. Actions as the ones we saw rushing to speak to President Macron of France about the Great Lakes conflict, and being ridiculed and being criticized as to whether he has actually made sufficient conversation. And you had the rebuttal by President Kagame in the aftermath of the Dar es Salaam talks, referring to that as non-committal, hypocrisy and not principled, speaks volumes as to whether the President William Ruto is using his proper reputation in these regional blocks to be able to shower the Kenyan status in the region and continentally. That is only when we'll be able to step up on the table to have influence at the global level.
All right. Thanks, Mkwanja. We have some snippets of conversations happening right now at the closed-door dinner, and I can see Raila is quoted as saying that we must unite as a nation and as a continent to address challenges facing us, which is poverty, corruption, ethnic profiling, etc. Raila also says that Ruto did not ask him to vie for the AUC. It was his own initiative. He also said that President Ruto supported him fully. And Raila is quoted here saying that I was on the verge of winning before unforeseen circumstances tilted the tide against us. The President, William Ruto, says that I am disappointed Raila did not win, but that's the nature of elections. We'll keep giving you snippets of what's going on in the closed-door meeting right now as we speak. There's also the reactions coming through from the Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. I see here on Twitter, on X rather, it says, President Ruto, our candidate Raila Odinga and his campaign team gave their best. Unfortunately, we have lost. We remain a proud nation that we came so close. Today was not our day. Our day will come. Thanks to all the friends of Kenya who stood with us when it mattered. The president also sent in a view as well, is saying that while the outcome of this election did not favor Kenya's candidate, I wish to convey my deepest gratitude to the entire leadership of our great continent. Thank you for considering the Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga's vision and priorities for the African Union and for according him the opportunity to share his passion for the continent's transformation. He further says that to the Excellencies Mahmoud Yusuf and Selma Haddadi, the chairperson and the deputy chairperson of the Africa Union Commission, I extend my sincere congratulations. You have the trust of the AU Assembly, and Kenya pledges a full support to you as you steer the Africa Union Commission to the next level. This election was not about individuals or nations. It was about Africa's future. That future remains bright, and together we will continue working for a united, prosperous, and influential Africa on the global stage. Gentlemen, thank you for making time. Franklin Mukwanja, Executive Director, CMD, Professor Maxwell Miyawa, Constitutional Lawyer, and Gordon Kachola, Foreign Policy Analyst, and also Dr. Mukisa Kitui, former Secretary General, UNCTAD, for speaking to us on phone. We're taking a quick break here on Citizen Weekend. We're back with much more in just a bit. Don't go too far.